Welcome to the Capital Forum Thought Leader Series. I'm here with Ausra Deluard, with the co-chair of the U.S. Competition and Antitrust Group at Dentons. And thank you so much for joining us today. Wanted to go through some of the big trends that we are seeing in recent years with the current enforcers, particularly in the U.S., and what we're seeing in the enforcement agenda going forward. So I guess to just table set and back up a little bit. So in the last few years, we've seen a lot of folks who might sit in your seat express skepticism about the viability of some of the enforcers' challenges, whether, particularly maybe the FTC, but also, skepticism for DOJ as well. And we've seen in the last few months, particularly, a string of wins that are adding some points to the board. So, has that changed how the conversation is going with clients in terms of what to watch out for, how to think about these various challenges, and how courts are responding?
Great question. Honestly, I think from the very beginning, we knew, Tim Wu said this, basically they're trying to turn a large ship around and really change the direction that the policy had been heading in. So we knew that they were going to face some difficult court challenges. And, so I think our sentiment from the beginning was, we'll see what the courts do. And we also know that their policy, they didn't pull this from nowhere, right? They're really, the term hipster antitrust, they're going back to the 1960s Supreme Court precedent. So it's not unfounded. And I think what's really important when we're looking at advising clients and trying to interpret and read the tea leaves as far as what's the risk, where are we going to go, is to think about what is the litigation risk, right? So what they might have these theories, and fundamentally, to be clear, I do think that the merger guidelines, really the first few guidelines are things that we're all familiar with, right? The structural presumption's always been there. The although it's lower now, perhaps to our frustration, but unilateral effects and coordinated effects, right? And so some of the other ones are additional theories of harm, but I don't think we're going to necessarily see the agencies bring cases on some of these alternative theories of harm alone. I think case selection is going to be really important. And in order to be able to develop the case law that they need to be able to support those theories of harm, they're going to bring cases that already have a strong, either satisfy the structural presumption or they have a strong unilateral effects component, head-to-head competition, even if the market's difficult to define, and potentially coordinated effects or a vertical issue, right? Traditional areas. And then they'll lop on these other ones. So we'll see labor come in within a pre-existing issue. And that's how I think they're going to develop their case law. So I don't think they're going to go to court with a completely novel theory of harm alone.
Right. Yeah. And we're definitely, I really want to touch on some of these, how these novel theories are emerging alongside some of these more traditional theories, kind of a two-prong approach to, I guess, shore up the litigation risk from the enforcement side. I think it's a really interesting aspect of how we're seeing these play out. But, to back up a little bit also, you were talking about the merger guidelines and sort of what's new, what's not. I mean, they were gestating for a while, got a lot of comments, is still the talk of the town here at this conference. What do you think are the biggest gives and takes that when we look at what was proposed and what we saw, I guess in December at the end of last year?
Honestly, I'm a big picture person. So when I look at the merger guidelines, I'm focused on, is there something that drastically changed? Did I see a change in direction or anything like that? And from my perspective, no. In fact, when I saw the draft merger guidelines, I was counseling clients from that day. I was like, these are the drafts. Even if they don't say final, this is essentially the agencies telling you, what they're looking at, how
Right.
they think about these cases.
Right.
And I don't really see that shifting significantly. I think they softened some of the language and did other things just to appease them. Exactly, to appease some people. I don't see a very significant shift from the draft to the final. And you can say, well, they took out maybe a threshold, a market share threshold for vertical, and they consolidated the two theories of harm for vertical into one.
Right.
That's honestly, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's still there. The substance is still there. I think the form
Right.
changed a little bit,
Right.
but the underlying substance between the draft and the final is very similar.
No, definitely. And I wanted to also circle back, right, as we're seeing folks digest these new guidelines, there's also looking at some of the wins that they've had in court. Illumina Grail is maybe an important one that was pending for a while, and then FTC ultimately won in the Fifth Circuit, I believe. So, that goes to some of, we were talking about vertical issues, some of the things that the agencies, I think, are thinking really hard about of how to challenge and what is the best way to approach these theories that may not have been tested as much before. So, for Illumina Grail or any other decisions that have been passed down, are there any particular takeaways in terms of how they could build on this in the future?
Yep. Great question. I think Illumina Grail is really important because when I look at the big picture of what are some of the key focuses of the administration, the looking at the supply chain and trying to understand where their bottlenecks are, right? It's almost like a clog in the pipe of the free flow of competition.
Yeah.
And so how do we eliminate that? How do we get competition flowing freely? And vertical transactions, foreclosure concerns, raising the costs of your rivals is a key component of that, and whether it's in the merger context or in other conduct. And what really strikes me about Illumina Grail is the skepticism of, look, we're really going to look at your incentives, and we're not going to trust you if you say, we're not going to do this because of reputational harm, we're going to play nice, or your commitment letter. And the idea that you can harm your competitors in much more nuanced ways. So the delays, the lower quality, the lack of customer service, things that might be harder to identify, but still it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts for your competitors. And so it's really reflecting this idea of we're going to be looking at competition holistically. And let's take a look at, do we see that someone in this position could have the power to essentially really inhibit competition, inhibit innovation, and shut others out of the market. And so it's this idea of, we don't want anyone having that much control that they have the power to do that and to hurt other people in the process, however that hurt might be reflected.
Yeah. And so, when corporates are looking at all of these different concerns emerging and thinking about antitrust risk with respect to, maybe both conduct and, M&A specifically, I mean, how are you counseling, how to look at both ordinary business documents and how deal negotiations take place, right? How has that advice, become more nuanced or more specific in recent years?
Honestly, my advice it's counseling the way that I've always wanted to counsel, which is first question, is there harm from the proposed transaction or the conduct? What is the harm? Who's going to be hurt and how? So that's the first question. The second question would be, is there anyone who's going to complain? And what is their complaint going to be? Because that helps you answer the first question, right? And so that helps you to identify, do we have to look further? Is there a concern here? You can do the ordinary course documents. Obviously, how they're thinking about everything reflects their rationale. So what is the rationale that goes into answering, is there harm? Is there likely going to be harm from the proposed conduct? And that you can glean from just speaking to the business. You can glean that from their business documents, but really getting into the strategy and trying to understand what's motivating this
Mhm.
strategy?
Mhm.
Why is it that they want to go there, right? Is this
Yeah.
something that they're saying, look, we really want to be able to create this new product. It's really difficult for us to do it alone. We need to do it with someone else, or we want to combine these complementary resources or know-how, whatever it might be, to be able to create something better. Then I'm like, okay, let's proceed. If they're saying we really need to create a competitive moat and protect ourselves from the competition, then I'm like, all right, well, it's
Let's take a step back.
I think you need to reevaluate.
Mhm.
And so I think it's really starting with the question of holistically looking at the market and thinking about where can the harm be. And that's what we see reflected in the merger guidelines. It's really moving away from the analytical structure that we've seen in the prior merger guidelines and focusing on what are the different ways that players in the competitive economy could stifle that competition and basically make it an unequal or unfair playing board.
Yeah. No, I think that is a really interesting point about the holistic approach that we're really seeing from both DOJ and FTC. And, especially with a lot of innovation markets, right, there can be non-price related effects. As you were saying, some of the vertical concerns are really about foreclosure or other kind of basically things that don't necessarily cost money. So in this context, I mean, what about some of the pending actions that we're seeing? Kroger Albertsons springs to mind. What did those say about, again, the building of that litigation portfolio and where they're trying to take the law?
I think that reinforces what we were saying earlier, where case selection is so important. So they want to be able to find cases where they have traditional theories of harm, and then they can add on additional ones. So we can say, okay, unilateral effects, concentrated market, and then also we're worried about labor to be able to start developing the case law, the precedent on some of these other theories. What you also see, especially in Kroger's, is the state AG's activity. And so while we've been focusing a lot of time on the DOJ and FTC and the merger guidelines, when I counsel clients, I also remind them of the state AGs. And the state AGs have typically in the past kind of followed along suit, coordinated with the DOJ or FTC in the investigation. And it was interesting in Kroger Albertsons that you actually saw 2 state AGs bring a case before the FTC did. And so you're starting to see state AGs play an active role in protecting competition in their states. And I think that that's going to continue to increase, especially as competition has become, I think, at the forefront of political debates, both at the state level and also federally.
Yes. And to follow up on that specifically, I mean, do you see any potential tension between what a state AG's interest might be, within their local market and with their local economy versus what the national enforcer might want, the federal enforcer might want?
That is a great question. We see that in healthcare a lot. I mean, there's the COPAs. The FTC hates the certificate of, so they hate those where the state AGs might actually say, okay, we do want players within our states who are large employers to continue to be able to employ a population here and to be able to have a robust community. And they might want to protect jobs in their state, whereas a federal agency is going to be looking at, let's look at the protection nationwide. Let's look at making sure that everyone's okay. Let's see what the harm is on a broader perspective. So I think a state AG might have local concerns that might also, and it might also depart from just traditional antitrust concerns. And so what we see, for example, in California, the state where I practice most of the time, you see the state AGs getting involved in some non-reportable hospital transactions and imposing additional regulations and conditions on the merging parties than you see the federal agencies doing, who are a little bit allergic to behavioral remedies right now. So, it's continued commitment to, on certain levels of care, enhancements and improvements, CapEx investments into the hospitals to actually improve the hospitals. So basically, if the merging parties are saying, hey, this is why we want to do the transaction because we could do all these things, the state AGs are turning around and saying, great, sign a document that says you're going to do exactly that. Whereas we don't see the federal agencies doing that at this point. And so I do think that the state AGs might have a broader array of concerns that they're looking at in the local level than the federal agencies might.
Right. No, it'll be interesting to see how these to continue to interact. Like you said, it's not necessarily always in the same direction. So yeah, I wanted to touch on, you mentioned the federal allergy to behavioral remedies, and I think enforcers have been very public in saying that generally we've always preferred structural remedies, right? But we have also seen that sometimes Amgen Horizon comes to mind. Ultimately, they accepted what was proposed, and it seems like there may be a little bit of leeway. And so in general, when approaching agencies with remedies, whether it is structural or it's behavioral, like how should parties be positioning that? Should they think about, like how much time should they be giving the agencies to consider these things? And what's kind of any negotiation tactic that should be considered?
Yeah, I think it comes down to litigation risk and case selection again.
Okay.
So you're really looking at are they going to actually bring this case? Mm-hmm. They have a number of different cases theories that they're trying to develop, right? Mm-hmm. So is this the case that they're going to bring to court because they think they have a high chance of being able to win, and it's an important set of facts that they could develop to support one of these theories of harm. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at remedies, there's a very high bar. Under Cantor, we really haven't seen a lot of remedies accepted before litigation. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the DOJ and FTC have to evaluate, is this a case that I can actually litigate and win? Mm-hmm. And they're going to, so if you propose or actually effectuate a fix, you could do a fix it first. And if you eliminate the overlap, well, then it's going to be a really hard case for the DOJ or FTC to bring. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the policy in some ways, by not negotiating with parties up front, if the parties have been very cooperative and have offered to try to fix the issue, it gives the DOJ and FTC, if they actually negotiate early on, more control over that settlement. Mm-hmm. They could vet the buyer, they could vet the terms, they can make sure that it's an adequate remedy, mm-hmm. that the incentives of the buyer are aligned to actually keep this business as a competitive constraint in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And by taking the public policy position that they have, that they're not going to accept structural remedies, mm-hmm. they lose that ability to be able to control that. So parties now can essentially call their bluff and say, look, I'm going to effectuate my own. I'm going to negotiate a private settlement. Mm-hmm. I'm going to sell off the assets that you're concerned about or the business line. Mm-hmm. And then what are you going to do?
Right.
And so I think that what we'll see is they're probably waiting for a situation to litigate the fix, to be able to, we have some case law already on litigating the fix, right. But they need to, I think they're going to continue to try to find the right cases to be able to do that. But I haven't told my clients that remedies are completely off the table because of all of the nuances and dynamics that we just discussed.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely kind of a case-by-case picture, even with a very strong public, discussion of, no, not even, maybe no more remedies. We want to fight the cases, right? A little bit. I wanted to kind of, the last topic, kind of a big picture question, especially since we are in an election year. Where do you see, if there wasn't a Republican administration, if we had a change of administration, do you see enforcement priorities changing, or do you see kind of the meeting of the minds with some like left-leaning and right-leaning politicians in terms of where antitrust needs to go, or general focus on antitrust?
Yep. So I really feel that we're at this time of extreme polarization between parties, between sentiments, but fundamentally, I think that as voters, as individuals, our concerns, our griefs, our angsts are very similar across party lines. Mm-hmm. And I think what you really see with the rise of populism globally is this just frustration that people have. Mm-hmm. They want to be able to have individual agency, to be able to, through creative efforts, through their business acumen, to improve their lives. And I think when you look at the current administration and the types of holistic way that they're looking at everything, sometimes the Democratic Party can be very suspicious of business, seeing business as the reason why that's the clog in the free flow of the competitive process, right? That's what's making this an unfair playing field, that they have too much control, and it's creating this disparity, and it's prohibiting the startups, the individuals, the small businesses from really being able to thrive and grow because they're getting smashed by big business. I think the Republican sentiment is probably, so you have fear of big business on one side, and then you have fear of big government on the other side. And so my parents were refugees from the Soviet Union. So I have some significant fear about big government. And I think what we need is a balance, right? So if government is too big, then you have overregulation, and it's stifling the ability of people to use their business judgment to find the most creative ways to create value, to innovate, to find solutions to problems, right? You don't want to substitute business judgment with bureaucracy judgment. That doesn't work out well. And so what we really want to do is find that middle ground. I think everyone has the same goal of how do we create that fair playing field so that everyone has a chance, so that we can innovate, so that we can be the country that has been, just innovating, creating products, a thriving economy. We all agree that that's what we want. I don't think any political party is going to try to get in the way of that.
Yes.
It's just a question of how do we best get there? And so that's why I actually love my job. People ask me, they're like, are you okay being a defense attorney during this huge, don't you want to be on the other side right now? And I'm like, no, my job is so important because my job is to make sure that we don't go too far in one direction and to keep us as balanced and on the point of being able to say, okay, it's not good for either side, big business or big government, to have too much power. Let's figure out the solution and the way to really be able to continue to reward and incentivize creativity, effort, innovation, superior business acumen. And let's get that right. So,
yeah. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This was so much fun.